Hello, Dr. H. This is Rick. I'm just going to talk a little bit about chapters 4 and 5 of The Norwegian Wood. Chapter 5, it's just mostly the letter to Toru. It didn't interest me too much, but I guess I'd start off with kind of something that I didn't really notice or think about until chapter 4. And that is, these characters are in Japan, but they really have an American kind of feel to them. And in 1968 or 69, that's only 23 years after, the surrender of Japan in World War II, our arch enemy, or we were enemies. And I know the occupation of Japan, at least from our view, was that we did everything we could to try and help them get back on their feet. And yet here are kids that were born after the war. Obviously, at least the ones that we know of, were born to parents who did not die in the war. So maybe, they don't have the same feelings that a little bit older kids would have whose parents might have died in the war. But they seem to embrace a lot of Western culture. Nagasawa and Toru are reading all Western novels, mostly novels that we know. Toru goes to watch The Graduate a couple times, even though he doesn't like it. And they're playing songs. Midori sings folk songs from our 60s here in the United States. I guess they're in Japanese words. And Toru and the other two girls are listening. In the background, the Bee Gees are playing, or Marvin Gaye. So it's interesting to me how that generation quickly adapted to American ways, and maybe even their city did, because here on page 65 it says, as Toru's looking for Midori's place, he said the whole atmosphere of the place suggested that most of the people who used to live here had become fed up with the cars and the filthy air and the noise and the high rents, and moved to the suburbs, leaving only cheap apartments and company flats, and hard-to-move shops, and a few stubborn holdouts who clung to old family properties. Everything looked blurred and grimy, and as if wrapped in a haze of exhaust gas. Of course, that's many of our cities in the 60s, 70s, people were just fleeing them and out to the suburbs for something new. The other thing I would bring up is probably what, a lot of the kids are bringing up, and that is when we meet Midori, she tells us about how her mother died, and how that shouldn't have smiled during that, how she died of cancer and suffered, and what a burden it was onto her. Of course, this is the exact opposite of how Kazuki died. So I think it's probably important to the story how those two are so different. But it's interesting what she says about how, what scares her about death. And so she says here on page 77, but dying itself, I'm not afraid of. Really, like here, I like to be overcome with smoke and lose consciousness and die before I knew it. That doesn't frighten me at all compared to the way I saw my mother and a few relatives die. All my relatives die after suffering with some terrible illness. It's in the blood, I guess. It's always a long, long process. And at the end, you almost can't tell whether the person is alive or dead. And all that's left is pain and suffering. That's the kind of death that frightens me. The shadow of death slowly, slowly eats away at the region of life. And before you know it, everything's dark and you can't see. And the people around you think of you as more dead than alive. I hate that. I couldn't stand it. I understand what she's saying there, but we come into this world helpless. We can't do anything for ourselves. Is that the way we're supposed to leave this world? Nobody wants the suffering. But are we supposed to just wither away to a state of helplessness like we were at the beginning? You talked about how your father passed away, just like that. Some people say it's good to go quick. I don't know. I just had a friend from work die who was 59. It was just totally out of the blue. I don't know. It's a tough question. Don't want to suffer, that's for sure. I believe in dying with dignity. But I do think there's something natural to kind of fading away. I won't mind fading away if I don't have to suffer. A little bit of suffering wouldn't be bad. And then the last thing I wanted to point out was kind of something Midori and Toru talked about. I thought it was really a good point of life. And she's talking about, oh goodness, I've got to find it, about having money. And I thought I clipped it here. She was saying about how, goodness gracious, she was talking about how her big problem at school was that people had money. Here it is. And she thought that Toru had money. And she says here, just looking at you, I kind of figured that you've never been hard up for money. Toru says it's true. I've never have been hard up for money. Now that we have tons of, not that we have tons of it either, I'm like most people. Well, most people in my school were rich, said Midori, palms up on her lap. That was the problem. And Toru says, so now you'll have plenty of chances to see the world without the problem, more than you want to, maybe. Money can be a problem, but sometimes we make it a problem. And, we're so worried about what someone else has. When we have enough, we need to kind of stop. I don't mean to be a philosopher here. We make money a problem when we have enough. But then here's a really neat thing they said, and then I'll end it. Being able to say, this is Midori speaking, being able to say you don't have any money. Like if I suggested to a classmate we do something, she could say, sorry, I don't have any money, which is something I could never say if the situation was reversed. If I said I don't have any money, it would really mean I don't have any money. It's sad. Like if a pretty girl says, I look terrible today, I don't want to go out, that's okay. But if an ugly girl says the same thing, people laugh at her. That's what the world was like for me 6 years until last year. It really is pretty true what they're saying there. It's like the person who comes in and who haggles about a price. Whoa, I can't afford that. And they can, but they're very quick to say that. One last thing while I was talking, I was a little disappointed that we didn't get to talk about The End of the Road. I wanted to hear what other people thought. I thought it was a terrific book. Really made me think. And I know it's a hybrid class, but maybe you could think about, I think there should be some emphasis on the end of a book and the totality of it. I know we don't have much time. But thanks a lot. Okay, see you next Tuesday. Bye.